The Napoleonic Wars, a time of near-constant conflict for much of Europe. It took all the major nations of Europe and 5 coalitions to defeat Napoleon for good. So the question is, which nation performed best and contributed the most to the end of French domination over Europe? For the purpose of this video I will only be looking at Austria, Britain, Prussia, Russia, and Spain, as they were the 5 most important nations that fought in the wars against France. I will be ranking them based on how much I feel they contributed to the many wars, how successful in their efforts each nation was militarily, and how big of an impact their actions had on the eventual outcome of the Napoleonic Wars. Coming in last, but still a very significant player in the Napoleonic Wars, is Spain. Spain was honestly the most difficult nation to rank on the list due to the often very complex nature of the Peninsular War. The endless guerrilla fighting bogged down French forces and was a constant drain on manpower for France. Despite constant attempts by France to control the entire Iberian Peninsula, Napoleon's marshals were never able to completely secure victory. French failures, however, do not mean that the Spanish were successful in their own efforts. The Spanish efforts came with many caveats. British assistance in both material support, along with an army to assist both Spain and Portugal's struggle, was crucial to the prolonged conflict. Without the huge amount of assistance provided by Britain, France may have been able to win the Peninsular War. Spanish forces also suffered a large number of defeats in battle, often losing to French forces on the battlefield and in brutal sieges. Throughout the war, the country and its people suffered horribly. Overseas, Spain rapidly lost control over its colonial empire. The huge number of losses suffered by Spain during and after the war, along with the reliance in part on support from Britain to continue the fight, places Spain last on the list. Next on the list is Prussia. In 1806, during the Fourth Coalition, Napoleon decisively defeated Prussian forces and occupied most of the country. It was an embarrassing defeat for Prussia. The extremely poor performance of the Prussian army forced the nation to begin reforming the military to match the new standards set by Napoleon. Efforts to reform the army were mostly successful, and by 1812, when the Sixth Coalition was formed, the Prussian army was in a much better state to face France than it was in 1806. Prussian troops performed well on the battlefield, and along with the rest of the Sixth Coalition, forced Napoleon's abdication. In 1815, Prussian troops would play a critical role at the Battle of Waterloo, preventing Napoleon from defeating Wellington and the British, ending Napoleon's final hurrah. The Prussian spot on the list was impacted by the disasters of 1806, but the nation redeemed themselves, learning from their mistakes and playing a critical role in Napoleon's final downfall. It mainly did not rank higher because of its more limited participation in the Napoleonic Wars when compared to the other great powers of Europe. Sitting in the middle of the list is Britain. The British played an important role during the Napoleonic Wars, being a constant thorn in France's side. British funds and material assisted France's many enemies, helping them to fight on after many bloody and expensive wars. Victory at sea during the Battle of Trafalgar also ensured British naval dominance for the duration of the Napoleonic Wars and beyond. By controlling the sea, France was forced to watch out for attacks from the sea, and the British could blockade French ports whenever they wanted. Britain was a foe Napoleon could never fully defeat due to the disaster at Trafalgar. The best he would ever get was a few temporary times of peace. While the Royal Navy might have ruled the waves, the British Army was not nearly as powerful on land. The limited size of the British Army forced it to rely on working with others to even the odds when fighting France. Unlike nations such as Austria, Prussia, or Russia who were able to field huge forces, the limited size of the British army meant that it would never be able to be the decisive force behind Napoleon's defeat. That being said, the British army did punch above their weight, and the impact they had in Spain especially cannot be dismissed. As a result, Britain is solidly in the middle of the pack, a key player in events, but at the end of the day other nations contributed more through the sheer amount of blood spent on the battlefield. In second place on the rankings is the Austrian Empire. Out of all the nations that fought to stop the revolution and defeat Napoleon, none made more attempts than Austria. From 1792 to 1815 Austria would be in nearly a constant state of warfare with France, or preparing for the next war. While being a constant enemy of Napoleon, Austria faced numerous defeats, losing large amounts of land and influence in Europe. Austria's constant fighting meant hundreds of thousands would die in battle, or of disease. French victories however would come at an ever-mounting cost of life as well. Austria's army learned from its mistakes, and unlike Prussia, would prove that it could stand up to the French on the battlefield much sooner. Napoleon's first major loss of the Napoleonic Wars came at the hands of Austria in 1809 at the Battle of Aspern-Essling. By 1813 Napoleonic France was in a precarious position. The disaster of Russia had been a devastating blow, however Napoleon had been able to raise new troops to continue the war. Austria's decision to eventually enter the war was crucial to the success of the Sixth Coalition. The huge amount of forces provided by Austria would help play a crucial role on the battlefield, allowing the coalition to outnumber French forces. Diplomatically, Austria's Metternich held an important role in the efforts to win the war against Napoleon and what Europe would look like after his defeat. Austrian power and influence suffered greatly during the Napoleonic Wars. With the defeat of Napoleon however it regained much of what it had lost. Only one nation surpasses Austria in the sheer amount of soldiers contributed to the fight against Napoleon and efforts made to defeat him. Out of all the nations that Napoleon faced in war, Russia would prove to be his most costly opponent. Even before the doomed invasion in 1812, Russia had been one of Napoleon's more difficult enemies. The Treaty of Tilsit in 1807 reflected the fact that the Russian defeat was not as complete or devastating as those suffered by Prussia or Austria. Being forced to join the continental system would prove to be too much for the Russian economy however, leading to the resumption of trade with Britain. The resulting invasion of Russia was the most brutal and bloody part of the Napoleonic Wars. Both sides suffered huge losses, but when all was said and done, Napoleon's army was devastated. Mistakes made during the invasion, harsh conditions and Russia's refusal to surrender, meant that nearly all of the army that marched into Russia would never return. Russia's victory provided the opportunity for the rest of Europe to end France's domination over them. Europe watched as what little remained of the Grand Army escaped Russia, and one by one joined the Sixth Coalition as the tide turned against Napoleon. From Moscow to Paris the Russian army helped the coalition push Napoleon back, battle after battle. While all the nations on this list were integral to the eventual defeat of France, it was Russia who in the end dealt the largest blow to Napoleon. Let me know in the comments section if you agree with how I ranked each nation. I would be interested in hearing how others might rank them differently. Thank you for watching the video.